Hey everybody, welcome into the back room. I'm Andy Ostroy. We have another first-time guest in the back room today, Ameshia Cross. We shall chat with her in just a second, but first, thank you for tuning in. We appreciate you listening, and we'd love to hear your comments. So email us at backroomandy@gmail.com and or post on our social media, and we'll read some feedback next time. And if you like the podcast, please rate and review or follow and subscribe, and you'll be notified every time we post a new episode. We've been really trying to get people to do this because this is really important. If you go wherever you listen to this podcast or get your podcasts, there's usually a button that says follow. If you can click that, it would be great. And then there's usually an area that shows like some stars, 1 star to 5 stars. If you're so inclined to give us a rating of 5 stars, that would be fantastic. And then also somewhere around there on the screen is an ability to leave a review. And if you do listen and like the pod, then we'd love to have you leave a review. So thank you for doing that. Ameshia Cross. She is a Democratic strategist for national, state, and local campaigns. She's a regular political commentator and contributor on MSN, NBC, BBC, SiriusXM, iHeart Radio, and more. She's also a former campaign and communications advisor for President Barack Obama and a policy advisor for the National Urban League. Ameshia, welcome into the back room.
So glad to be here. Thanks so much.
So in less than 2 months, we've seen Donald Trump become a convicted felon. President Joe Biden had a disastrous debate performance, followed by 3 weeks of intense Democratic infighting. There was an assassination attempt on Trump. Biden then quits. Kamala Harris takes over. This really does give new meaning to the term anything can and will happen in politics, right?
Absolutely. And it also, it starts a new chapter in American history. We've never seen a campaign cycle that had as much shock and awe in the time frame that we've seen here. But in addition to that, we went from having 2 of the oldest men to ever front their party's nomination ticket to now only having one of those still in the race, the assassination attempt, the many court issues that Donald Trump faced, one of them in Florida being tossed out, the other one in New York resulting in 34 felony convictions. We saw Joe Biden having sizable problems around something that he can't necessarily control, his age, and that being seen as somehow equivalent to the convictions in some people's minds. I think that there was a lot that happened in this chapter of America that was really confusing. And as somebody who also does international media, they were, quite frankly, very upset at the way that it was being covered in the news here because they didn't understand how Trump could consistently be polling strongly, at least at that time, in a fight where January 6th was still in the background, where all of the election fraud scams were still in the background. Many of those individuals are currently facing court themselves, who were also members of his campaign and members of his entourage. In addition to that, we've seen this man continue to bolster racism, continue to bolster xenophobia, not offer any plans or policies for America's future, run a campaign on vengeance and grievance. And I think that showcased where America happened to be. And that was a little bit confusing for people who live across the pond. But for those of us here, I think that there were so many people who were turned off by this race in general that now we're seeing kind of come back to the fold.
Mm-hmm. Well, you just raised several really interesting points that I want to discuss with you. The first one is, how is this monster in a virtual dead heat, although the momentum is seemingly shifting? And the media has to have some responsibility in terms of the double standards, the normalization of this behavior. I mean, even in yesterday's presser alone, not one follow-up, not one attempt to fact-check, no pushback at all, just blatant, indiscriminate lying from start to finish with absolute impunity.
You're absolutely right. And I think that the media plays a major role in this. And it's ironic because Donald Trump came into the presidency, he came into his first election cycle basically bastardizing media. He called them the enemy of the people. He called out journalists by name. He encouraged people to assault journalists. He was very antagonistic, but he was also someone who lived, ate, slept, and breathed on media attention. Mm-hmm. And he never really had to pay for it. Remember this, he wasn't paying for ads. He didn't have to because the media was following him no matter what he did. And from 2016 to now, they are consistently doing that same thing. And I think that it's very interesting to watch, considering how vitriolic he's been towards media, but also that we know what's going to happen when Trump says that he's going to have a press conference. it means that he is going to tell the press what he wants to tell them and not answer a single question they actually pose to him.
Mm-hmm.
They abandon all media integrity when interviewing Donald Trump.
Mm-hmm.
It's very interesting that there are never any follow-ups. There's never any revisiting of a question he didn't answer. There's never any questioning of his blatant lies. He's never, fact-checked in real time. It's always an hour after his long spiel is over.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't run the counter.
Mm-hmm.
One of the most interesting things about yesterday was that Kamala Harris actually had a conversation shortly thereafter that wild press conference, and not a single network carried it live.
Right.
Not one. I think that what we're seeing here is a disingenuous media overall, but what we're also seeing is a media that did not learn a single lesson from 2016. And for that matter, one that didn't learn anything from 2020 as well. We're acting as though this man is a good faith actor who is running for president when he showed us time and time again that he is not. He is someone that is willing to steal an election. He's someone who is willing to try to overthrow government. He is someone who's willing through Project 2025 to change government as we know it into an authoritarian regime. And I think that for the most part, many in the media elite class, because they saw seismic gains in the terms of viewership and other things from some of his crazy antics, liked it and decided that it was worth the chase. At this point, I think that the American public is so turned off of it. They deserve better. And many have turned to other sources as well. They're looking at pods, listening to pods. They are, watching independent journalists. They are following influencer media that is out on the case, asking those questions, and are literally showcasing what is happening at some of these rallies and other events. I think that is where it's going, largely because of the faith and the mistrust that many folks have because of how Donald Trump has been covered by media. It is unfair. It is unrealistic. It does not do a service. And I think it's unfortunate, especially in Joe Biden's case, because media acted as though they had a scoop that somehow Joe Biden had some type of illness. He had some type of mental acuity issue. They ran with the rumor of Parkinson's that his own doctor came out and denied multiple times and produced medical records to showcase that was not it. That was not happening. Mm-hmm. And we saw them push back against Karine Jean-Pierre, the White House press secretary, multiple times, badgering her. Mm-hmm. Meanwhile, Donald Trump can blatantly lie, bring up MLK for no good reason, other than the fact that he wants to compare crowd sizes when there is no comparison. Yeah. And not even a blatant lie gets checked.
And it's not like this is rocket science. I mean, how difficult would it be for the media to say, sir, do you realize Hannibal Lecter is a fictional character? So when you say he likes Trump, he's a good guy, you sound nuts. How, even to push back on the craziest of the crazy, there's not even any of that. And so you're right. The double standard that exists today after what we saw Biden be put through, after what we saw Karine be put through in the White House. And then you say, okay, well, it's a dead heat. Why is it a dead heat? Because the media treats him like a legitimate candidate, saying legitimate things. And it's still, after 9 years, a landscape where he is viewed and analyzed as if he is a normal candidate. I don't get it. I don't know if that's ever going to change. But why is the press so neutered by him, so terrified of him still?
Because I think the press, in all honesty, is also enamored by him. I think that there is an aura that the press somehow consistently falls into with Donald Trump. And I will say it's your traditional press. It is largely the major networks, but it is also white-leaning press. Mm-hmm. As somebody who was just last week in Chicago for the National Association of Black Journalists are not on that. I mean, they were one of the first groups that he attacked forthrightly during 2016 campaign, and he's consistently attacked them every day since. I think that what we're seeing here is a confluence of this man knows how to work a media landscape like nobody else who's run for political office in the modern era. And part of that is because he comes from the entertainment world. Part of that is because he comes from the reality TV world. And part of that is because he knows how to bust through a news cycle. One of the reasons why some people considered yesterday a win for him, even though it was as crazy can get, was that we're still talking about it today. Was that he was able to bust through a news cycle where Kamala Harris and her vice presidential choice were the conversation. In a week, it's going to be a week and a half. It's going to be all things about the Democratic National Convention. He's trying to find spotlights where he can get his name out there, where you're not talking about Kamala and JD or Kamala and her vice president, Waltz. You're not talking about JD Vance and the cat ladies. Trump wants to talk about Trump. Mm-hmm. And I think that when he was there, he was able to shift the media cycle to all eyes are on him. That's what he considers his sweet spot, even though he has not expanded the base. All he proved was that he can run on tangents, which we kind of already knew, that his MAGA talking points, the MAGA greatest hits, as we call them, immigrants are still in your jobs. Somehow Black males are shifting to vote Republican, even though there has been no exit polling in any election cycle that shows that there's a sizable increase in Black male votes for Republicans. In addition to spreading lies about various cities across the country. And again, his obsession with crowd size. He is extremely bothered that Kamala Harris is out here commanding major attention, that she's bringing forth different demographics of individuals, that this is no longer the race between him and Joe Biden. And he's stuck on the 2020 election. He spent a great deal of time in yesterday's press conference talking about how it was stolen from him, essentially, how, votes were miscast in Georgia, how they were going to get it right. It was a lot of still grievance and ignoring that the very things that he pushed against when it came to a very functional, fair election cycle were the reasons why we had January 6th. He has I don't want to say he doesn't have cognition, because I think that he does, but he continues to tell this story and push this lie. And that is honestly where I got most frustrated with the press. January 6th, people's lives were at stake. Several people actually did die.
Yeah.
You had gallows outside of the Capitol for his own sitting vice president. There is no way that the American media should treat Donald Trump as if he is a good faith actor when he was willing to overthrow the United States government because he lost an election.
I've watched it at best case neutered by Trump, and at worst case, a willing participant in his insanity and his existential threat to our democracy. And I think you're right. His goal was to get attention. I'm just not sure he got the right attention. But the real question I want to ask you in 2024, are there any real independents left? Are there people that at the middle of August right now can be swayed still because they just haven't seen enough yet to make a decision whether or not they want to vote for Trump or now Kamala Harris? I mean, I spoke with Mike Madrid, and he said there's no percent left. Like, it just, those people don't exist. They've made up their mind. They're either on the left or the right. There's really nobody in the middle anymore. What do you think about that?
I think that that's absolutely true. There are people who just don't want to tell you who they're going to vote for shame reasons, especially if they're going to vote for Trump. But I don't think that there are people who are independent anymore. What we've seen and what this election process has shown us over time is that most voters have their camps. Either they're going to vote Democrat or they're going to vote Republican. Third camp is they're going to stay the hell at home. The biggest fear when Biden was still on the ticket for Democrats was that so many Democrats had become disaffected. They felt dejected. They did the polls. They saw him as not being able to really carry on that fight through November. And they were just not enthused in any way by this election cycle. That didn't mean they were going to vote Trump. That meant that they were not going to participate. And I think that we do see that we see a percentage of that in every election. But when it comes to independents, especially when you have candidates that are as starkly contrasted as Donald Trump and Kamala Harris, there is no guess game between this. I know there was some conversation leading amongst conservative networks a few months ago around RFK Jr. and what third-party candidates could do. Third-party candidates never really serve as anything but spoilers in really tight races to take a small percentage of points away. But for the most part, they're never going to really lodge a campaign that threatens anybody of the major parties, of major political parties. But I don't even think this election cycle is going to be going to make that much of a difference with the third party spoiler. It is going to be Trump or Kamala Harris. And because Trump and the Republicans have gone so hard against women, because they have fought against women's reproductive rights primarily, because you have JD Vance out here talking about childless cat lady, because you have him saying that women should stay in marriages where they are being abused every day because it's good for the children. You need to keep the family together. Those types of conversations, the largest voting bloc in America is women. Those types of conversations make what has been considered historically, at least among white women, as a swing vote, with suburban voters voting one way, non-suburban voters and educated voters voting a different way. This election cycle has galvanized women holistically, largely because they want to have privacy in their reproductive choices. They want to have access to reproductive health care, up to and including IVF as well. They also want to be able to leave situations that are detrimental to their health. I think that we are in a very different election cycle, in large part because Republicans push way too far to the fringe, and that there are no independents because of it.
Mm. So, and I tend to agree with that. And so it really boils down to just a massive get out the vote campaign, right? I mean, Democrats turnout is what, 55, 60%? I mean, if that was 70%, maybe even 65%, seems like Democrats could have whatever they want and probably win not only the White House, but maintain the Senate and take back the House. You know, it seems like there's so much focus that's always put on like, wow, we got to, convert Trump voters, or we got to appeal to the people in the middle. Maybe this year it's really just about energizing Black people, Hispanic people, Gen Z, millennials, women, suburban women, our own coalition, our constituency, and especially if there's really no people left who are quote unquote undecided.
I think that that's what the math is telling us. The math is mathing in this case, Andy. And I also think that that is what the Harris campaign strategically calculated when they chose Walz as the VP, because we know that he is obviously has this younger base, really excited. But in addition to that, he also swings to the left of Kamala Harris. The idea that there are these people that we need to moderate. There's these people who are within the middle that might have been Trump voters who can move over, or might have been, conservative leaning that could move over. I don't necessarily think that that is where we are at this point. Mm-hmm. If it was where we were, then Trump would not be running neck and neck in the polls, if polls are to be believed. But in addition to that, we also would not have seen him become the nominee for his party's ticket. They had a plethora of options. If they wanted to choose somebody who wasn't Donald J. Trump, they had months to do so. Mm-hmm. They did not.
What do you think is going to happen going forward? Because we know he's sitting there in Mar-a-Lago. He's not really out campaigning. We know he's stewing. She's going to continue to be brilliant and flawless on the campaign trail. Her crowd sizes are enormous, which is driving him crazy. He's going to become more and more unhinged. Now there's talk of Kellyanne Conway coming back, which does nothing to gain him more voters, but it perhaps makes him feel better that he's got somebody, a whipping girl who will kowtow to everything he wants and desires and be a complete sycophant out there in ways that he craves. What else is coming? I mean, how crazy can it get with him?
Oh, wow. Judging Trump's crazy. That's a really long runway. I think that he's spiraling. And if we are to look at Truth Social, everything that he's saying there, giving Kamala Harris weird nicknames, mm-hmm. Throwing in Barack Obama's full name, talking about Joe Biden basically pulling a magician's trick, showing up at the DNC and snatching back being the head of the ticket. None of those things are going to happen. That's just that is outside of the realm of reality. Mm-hmm. But with Donald Trump, we have a guy who, quite frankly, thought that he had an easy road to hoe to November. Mm-hmm. He was hoping that Joe Biden would stay in the race, even though he talked about him and wanted him out on the campaign trail multiple times. But when that ticket changed and Democrats coalesced so quickly around Kamala Harris and he saw the fundraising, I mean, we're talking millions of dollars a day. We're talking different demographics on calls, organizing calls every night within the first 2 hours of the announcement that she was going to be at the top of that ticket. And after that endorsement that we saw from Joe Biden. Joe Biden deserves all the praise, because not only did he bow out gracefully and in honor of what he saw as the best way to defeat Donald Trump in November, but he also made it very apparent to those within the Democratic Party who wanted to dump an entire ticket, as well as those within the Republican Party, that this is the standard bearer for my administration, for this next generation of leadership in Kamala Harris. I think that what we're going to see from Donald Trump is a continued spiral. He does not really want to debate her. He doesn't have cogent thought. It's going to be very hard to debate a prosecutor when you are convicted of 34 felonies, right, many of which are the same types of crimes she prosecuted when she was in California. Mm-hmm. In addition to that, I think that the age difference on screen is going to be glaring. It is going to be a very difficult process because he loved to think that, Joe Biden looks old and feeble and frail. He talked about it time after that first debate. Now who's going to look old, feeble, and frail?
Right.
Donald J. Trump. I think that he is spiraling because of the crowd size, because again, this man is magnanimous. He loves to, self-aggrandize and talk about campaign and talk about his rallies. Guess who's bringing out the big names, bringing out hundreds of thousands of people at rallies day after day? Whenever she hosts a rally, thousands of people show up. The most recent one, they had to move to a different location because the first one could not accommodate the population. She's going to consistently see that. And I think for Trump, that is a hard pill to swallow because his crowds aren't that excitement, that those new voices, those younger people, the diversity that's in that audience. That's the diversity that scares the hell out of MAGA Republicans.
Yeah, well, his rallies have become like going to a Leonard Skinner concert, and the only song they sing over and over again is Freebird. So let me ask you this. As we know, politics and life is not a fairy tale. And even though she's been off to a flawless start, there's 3 months left in this campaign, and those could be a very long 3 months. What are her biggest challenges?
I think some of her strengths are definitely her ability to communicate and to host these larger events. I think that she should continue doing that, particularly in the battleground states. That's going to be a huge plus for her. In addition to that, I would argue in as much as she can continue to tell her story, because there are still several people across this country, because she was vice president, and surely by the role of being vice president, you are not the one who is first in charge. You are not the one that they see as much. She's got to be able to narrate who Kamala Harris is, because you don't want to cede that ground to the other side. The things that I think that she would have to work on the most, or the things she needs to have in mind, one, she's got to have a clear policy stance on the Israel-Gaza conflict. There is no way around that conversation. But in addition to that, she has to be able to differentiate her policies, or what a Kamala Harris administration would look like, versus the administration she's currently in. Because she's in the position where she automatically inherits all of the strengths of the Joe Biden administration, the infrastructure package, the reductions in the cost of prescription drugs like insulin, the job creation, all of those things. But she also inherits some of the baggage, the attacks about inflation, the attacks about what's going on at the border, migrant issues. There are several things on that end that I think that she's going to have to make a policy carve out for herself that makes sense to the people who are listed those as their top concern.
How do you think she handles the immigration, the border issue?
The thing about that one is that it's going to be tough no matter who has it. We've been kicking the can down the road on immigration reform for decades across multiple different presidencies, regardless of partisan leaning. She's going to have to work with states. She's also going to have to work with the Northern Triangle countries as well as Mexico. I think that for her, there's got to be a conversation around not only root causes, because I think we're beyond that at this point, one in which we do create limits, one in which that mirrors, in some cases, what we saw from the immigration package that had already gone through the Senate and was approved by Republicans and then died at the House because of a call from Donald J. Trump. I think that there's got to be more border security. There's got to be more funding for it. There's got to be limits. There's also got to be tighter restrictions, because at this point, there is a sheer number that has created not only a burden for Texas, but because of some unsavory moves by the governor of Texas and the governor of Florida, you also see cities like Chicago, cities like New York, cities that are non-border cities across the country who are also facing not having enough housing for migrants, not having, the healthcare infrastructure to be able to take care of this influx. You're seeing all types of things that are making it harder for those cities to be able to handle this as well. And I think that there's got to be a conversation about a pathway to citizenship, but there also has to be a conversation about how our legal system should work when it comes to those who are seeking asylum, who is actually eligible for asylum, and a process to which we work on the cases that we already have. Because quite frankly, we are hundreds of thousands of backlogs deep in cases when it comes to asylum cases that have yet to be reviewed, that have been there for, at this point, years. I think that there has to be a strategy around those things. And she's got to make it full-throated. And it's going to be one, honestly, that may not look as progressive as some people would like, which I would argue the one that came across the White House, that came from that was endorsed by the administration originally a few months ago wasn't necessarily something that progressives jumped on either. I think that it's going to have to be something where we meet in the middle, because at this point, that's the only thing we can really do.
Well, you're really raising something which I find really interesting, especially if you tie it back to the conversation we just had a few minutes ago about, are we trying to appeal to Trumpers and people on the right and people in the quote-unquote middle, or are we really just trying to get out the vote on the Democrats' side? And if it's the latter, then the discussion has to be which conversation about immigration, which conversation about the border should she be having? As we know, Trump's conversation, the Republicans' conversation, is all about fear-mongering about the scary black and brown people and how we want to keep everybody out and just take all that money and help Americans with it. The left, I think, is about compassion and empathy and figuring out a path to citizenship and helping people. So instead of stepping into a minefield that is a narrative created by Republicans, maybe she just needs to create the different narrative which would appeal more to Democrats and perhaps even more progressives than wading into the cesspool of whatever the Republicans have been spewing.
I think that that's true. You don't lean in on the conversation they want you to have. You lean in on a conversation you want to have. But in addition to that, they also don't have a solution for the border that would not be incredibly inhumane. We're talking erecting a barbed wire, watching people drown in the Rio Grande, separating families. Like the process on the right is very scary. For her, I think there has to be a humanitarian side of things. There also has to be an understanding that we do need to address this. But in addition to that, immigration reform policy and its implementation is a concerted effort that does not just come from the White House. This is also congressional. And we have to remind people, and I think that she's done that in certain ads that she's had come out. And we know that LULAC, I think the largest Latino advocacy organization in the nation, Latino civil rights organization, endorsed her this morning. I think that it's very important that we are paying attention to strategy here, but also acknowledging Congress's role in this. One of the most comprehensive immigration reform bills that came out in our time came from former President George W. Bush, and his own party voted it down. So I think that we have to be understanding of where Congress stands on this, and we have yet to see comprehensive immigration reform come out, largely because Congress has not passed it. And she's reminding people that there were not one, not two, but three immigration reform bills that came before this Congress that the Republican-led House blew up. This will not be done by executive order.
No,
this has to be done in conjunction with Congress.
And you're right. It is something that has been worked on for decades, and it baffles me that we still can't get to where we need to be as a country. But Ameshia, thank you so much for the conversation. It was very insightful, and I hope you'll come back.
Thanks for having me. It was a great time.
All righty. Take care. This episode of The Back Room was edited and produced by me, Andy Ostroy. It was co-edited and co-produced by Matty Rosenberg and co-produced by Jen Hammoud. Our theme song was composed by Andrew Hollander, and our logo was designed by Cricket Lengyel. And special thanks to Patricia Wind. Please take a moment to rate and review the podcast, and also follow or subscribe. Until next time, keep your eyes on Washington, Hollywood, and your own backyards, and have a great week.